My name is Lena Hayes, and I used to believe that loyalty was the backbone of any great company. That hard work spoke louder than office politics. That if you kept your head down, delivered results, and treated people with respect, you'd eventually be seen, not just as a cog in the machine, but as someone who mattered. I was wrong. It took one meeting in a glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor of Viridian Dynamics to shatter that illusion. The kind of room where the view of downtown Chicago stretches so far you can almost forget you're trapped in a cage of your own making. I'd spent 3 years building Viridian's ESG analytics division from nothing, just me, a laptop, and a stubborn belief that sustainability wasn't just PR fluff, but a real driver of long-term value. I'd brought in clients, slashed operational waste by 18%, and even got us featured in Fortune's Green 50, all on a salary that barely covered my student loans. So when I walked into that meeting with Marcus Thorne, the CFO with a jawline like a credit card and a laugh that sounded like ice cracking, I wasn't asking for the moon. Just 5%. A 5% equity stake in the division I'd built. Not the whole company. Not even a seat on the board. Just enough to say, asterisk, I helped make this. I belong here, asterisk. Marcus didn't even look up from his tablet when I finished my pitch. He leaned back in his ergonomic throne, steepled his fingers, and let out that laugh, the one that still echoes in my nightmares. Lena, he said, voice dripping with condescension, you're adorable. 5%. For analytics. You think spreadsheets and carbon reports are worth real equity. He turned to the 2 junior execs flanking him like obedient Dobermans. She thinks data has feelings. They chuckled on cue. One of them actually snorted. I stood there, palms sweating, throat tight, but I didn't flinch. The data shows we've added $87 million in shareholder value through efficiency gains alone, I said evenly. And ESG-compliant firms outperform the S&P by an average of 4.8% over 5 years. That's not feelings, Marcus. That's math. He waved a hand like I just offered him a coupon for existential dread. Save the TED Talk for your yoga class. You're a contractor. A smart one? Sure, but replaceable. We could hire 3 of you for the cost of that 5%. Then he stood, straightened his $3,000 suit, and added, don't let the revolving door hit you on the way out. I left that room with my dignity in tatters and my future in freefall. But something else stirred in me too. Something cold, sharp, and utterly focused. Because Marcus didn't know one critical thing. I hadn't just built Viridian's ESG division. I'd built its skeleton. Every algorithm, every risk model, every predictive metric that told Viridian where to invest, divest, or double down, I'd coded it myself. Late nights, weekends, holidays, I'd woven sustainability data into the core of their investment strategy, not as a side project, but as the nervous system of their $350 million flagship portfolio. And because Viridian was cheap and Marcus was arrogant, they'd never bothered to audit my work or transfer ownership of the underlying architecture. Legally, it was mine. The IP clause in my contractor agreement was vague, deliberately so, I'd thought at the time, to give me flexibility. Now it was my weapon. 2 weeks after my firing, I sat in my tiny apartment overlooking a laundromat, staring at the severance check that barely covered 2 months' rent. My laptop glowed with lines of code I hadn't touched in years, my personal backup of the Viridian ESG engine, nicknamed Aurora after the Northern Lights. Beautiful, elusive, and capable of disrupting entire systems. I opened a new terminal window, typed a single command, and watched as Aurora woke up. Not on Viridian's servers. On mine. You see, Marcus thought ESG was just a shiny label they slapped on quarterly reports to attract millennial investors. But Aurora wasn't just about carbon footprints or board diversity scores. It was a predictive behavioral model, trained on decades of market crashes, regulatory shifts, and black swan events that could spot systemic risk before it bloomed. And right now it was screaming. Loudly. Aurora had flagged 3 holdings in Viridian's portfolio as critical risk. A lithium miner in Chile with hidden water rights violations, a biotech firm cooking its clinical trial data, and, most damning, a green infrastructure fund secretly backed by a Russian oligarch under U.S. sanctions. If these blew up, Viridian wouldn't just lose money. They'd lose credibility. Clients would flee. Regulators would circle. And Marcus, his golden parachute would turn to lead. I could have gone to the press, leaked the data anonymously, watched the chaos from afar. But that felt small. Revenge isn't about destruction. It's about justice wearing a tailored suit. So I did something quieter, smarter. I reached out to Silas Chin. Silas ran Horizon Capital, a boutique firm known for its ruthless precision and even rarer integrity. He tried to hire me twice before Viridian. Both times, I turned him down because I believed in what I was building. Now, I had nothing left to believe in except consequences. We met at a dimly lit sake bar in River North, far from prying eyes. Silas listened without interrupting as I laid out Aurora's findings, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. When I finished, he swirled his glass, ice clinking like distant chimes. "You're not just offering intel," he said finally. "You're offering a scalpel." "I'm offering a chance to do what Viridian never would," I replied. "Invest with eyes wide open." He studied me, the dark circles under my eyes, the set of my jaw, the fire banked low but burning steady. "What do you want, Lena?" "Not money. Not yet. I want to be in the room when it happens. When Marcus realizes the foundation of his empire is sand." Silas smiled. "A thin, dangerous thing. Consider yourself hired, as head of strategic risk. Starting Monday." The next 6 weeks were a blur of encrypted calls, midnight code tweaks, and legal vetting so tight it made my teeth ache. Silas's team moved like ghosts, quietly shorting Viridian's vulnerable holdings while building long positions in ethical alternatives Aurora flagged as high resilience. Every trade was a whisper, every move invisible. Meanwhile, Viridian's quarterly earnings call approached. Marcus would be strutting on stage, touting their industry-leading ESG integration, while sitting on a time bomb. I watched the live stream from Horizon's war room, surrounded by analysts who now treated me like a prophet. Marcus looked smug, polished, utterly untouchable. He even name-dropped the ESG division, my division, as a key differentiator. Then, during Q&A, an analyst from a major pension fund asked about their due diligence on emerging market holdings. Marcus chuckled. "We have the most robust risk protocols in the industry. Aurora, that's our proprietary system, flags issues before they become headlines." My blood went cold. He was using my creation to lie. That night, I sent Aurora one final command. Not a deletion, not a hack, a revelation. I triggered a cascade protocol buried deep in the code, a failsafe I'd built after watching Viridian ignore early warnings about the Chilean miner. Aurora would now auto-generate a full forensic report of every high-risk holding, complete with source documents, satellite imagery, and whistleblower testimonies. And it would send that report directly to Viridian's own compliance department, with a CC to the SEC and the Wall Street Journal. The next morning, my phone exploded. First, a panicked email from Viridian's general counsel demanding I cease and desist. Then, a call from Marcus himself, voice ragged, stripped of its usual arrogance. "Lena, what the hell did you do?" "I didn't do anything, Marcus," I said softly. "Aurora did. It's just honest." Silence. Then a whisper. "You'll never work in the city again." "Funny," I said. "I just got promoted." I hung up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window of Horizon's office. Below, Chicago pulsed with life, cars, people, ambition. Somewhere out there, Marcus was scrambling to contain a fire he'd spent years ignoring. But this wasn't over. Because Aurora had just flagged something new. Something bigger. A pattern in Viridian's parent company's offshore transactions. A trail leading to a shell corporation in the Caymans. And at the end of that trail, a name that made even Silas go pale. I stared at the data streaming across my screen, heart pounding not with fear, but with purpose. Marcus thought he'd crushed me. But he'd just handed me the keys to his kingdom. And I wasn't just taking his $350 million portfolio. I was going to rebuild it. Better, cleaner, truer. Starting tomorrow. The name on the Cayman Shell Corporation wasn't just familiar, it was infamous. Daniel Rourke, Viridian's reclusive chairman. The billionaire who never gave interviews, never attended board meetings, and hadn't been photographed in public since 2012. The man who'd handpicked Marcus to run Viridian like a personal fiefdom while he pulled strings from a private island somewhere between tax evasion and myth. Aurora had traced a series of consulting fees from Viridian's Green Infrastructure Fund, $28 million over 18 months, funneled through 3 layers of dummy companies before landing in an account tied to Rourke's known associates. Worse, the Russian oligarch backing the fund. He and Rourke shared a yacht, and a lawyer, and, apparently, a taste for laundering reputations, as well as money. Silas stared at the screen like it might bite him. "If this leaks—" "It doesn't leak," I said. "Not yet." Because I finally understood. Marcus was just the face. Rourke was the rod. And if I wanted real justice, not just revenge, I had to go after the root, not the branch. I spent the next 72 hours in a caffeine-fueled haze, cross-referencing Aurora's findings with public filings, shipping manifests, and even old SEC depositions from Rourke's early days in private equity. The pattern was undeniable. Viridian's entire ESG strategy wasn't just window dressing, it was camouflage. A $350 million smokescreen to hide illicit capital flows and reputational laundering. And I built the very tool they used to make it look legitimate. That stung. But it also gave me leverage no one else had. I called Marcus again. Not to gloat. To negotiate. He answered on the first ring, voice hoarse. Are you insane? The Journal's running a front-page expose tomorrow. Our stock's down 12% pre-market. Clients are pulling out. Then you'll want to hear this. I cut in. I can stop it. Silence. Then wary how? Aurora's report has two versions. The one sent to the SEC. It's redacted. Names blacked out. Holdings anonymized. Enough to trigger an investigation, but not enough to sink Viridian overnight. He exhaled sharply. You're bluffing. Am I? Check your compliance inbox. Look at the metadata. The full, unredacted version is still in my possession. And it names Rourke. A beat. Then a whisper. You wouldn't. Try me. I laid out my terms. Full public acknowledgement that I was the architect of Viridian's ESG strategy. A formal apology. And most importantly, Marcus would step down as CFO, citing personal reasons, effective immediately. In return, I'd hand over the clean version of Aurora and disappear. No, he snapped. Rourke will have me flayed. Rourke won't care about you once the SEC starts knocking on his door, I said coldly. But if you do this, you walk away with your reputation bruised, not buried. Your choice. He didn't answer for a full minute. When he spoke again, his voice was hollow. Fine. But if you double-cross me, you'll what? Fire me again. I hung up. By noon, Viridian issued a press release. Marcus Thorne was resigning to pursue other opportunities. The Journal's expose ran that evening, but without names, without Rourke, without the Cayman Trail. Just enough to rattle the markets, not collapse them. Regulators opened an inquiry. Shareholders grumbled, but Viridian survived. For now. 2 weeks later, I stood in a sunlit conference room at Horizon Capital, signing my official employment contract as head of ethical investment strategy. Silas had doubled my offer. Not because of what I'd done to Viridian, but because of what I'd built after. Because while Marcus was packing his office, I'd rewritten Aurora. Not as a weapon, as a shield. The new Aurora didn't just flag risk, it enforced integrity. Every investment Horizon made now ran through its filters: environmental impact, labor practices, governance transparency, even geopolitical ethics. No exceptions. Not even for billion-dollar returns. We launched our first fund 3 months later, the Horizon True North portfolio. It returned 9.3% in its first quarter, beating the S&P, and attracted over $200 million in commitments from pension funds, universities, and even a few former Viridian clients who'd had enough of smoke and mirrors. I never heard from Marcus again. Rumors said he'd moved to Miami, consulting for crypto startups with no ESG policies at all. Good riddance. But Rourke, he surfaced 6 months later. Not in court, not in headlines. At a charity gala in Aspen. I saw the photo online. Silver hair, tailored tuxedo, arm around a senator's wife. Smiling like he owned the air. That night, I opened Aurora's command line one last time. Not to expose. Not to destroy. To watch. Because I'd embedded a new protocol, a silent observer, into every public database Aurora now fed. It tracked Rourke's known entities, his shell companies, his offshore trails. Not for revenge. For vigilance. If he ever tried to launder his way back into legitimacy, Aurora would be waiting. Not with a bomb. With a spotlight. And I'd be the one holding it. I closed my laptop and walked to the window of my new office. Bigger now, with a view of Lake Michigan. The water was calm, silver under the moon. 3 years ago, I believed loyalty mattered. Now I knew better. Integrity mattered. Truth mattered. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do isn't to burn a system down, but to build a better one in its place. I turned back to my desk, where a framed photo sat beside my monitor. Me 2 years ago, standing in front of Viridian's headquarters on my first day. Hopeful, naive, wearing a thrift store blazer 2 sizes too big. I smiled. Then I opened a new file. Subject line, Project Phoenix. Because the work wasn't done. It never is. A year later, Viridian collapsed, not with a bang, but a whimper. The SEC's investigation, quietly fed by Aurora's silent observer, uncovered enough to force Rourke into a $180 million settlement and a lifetime ban from public markets. Marcus vanished into obscurity, his name scrubbed from every alumni list and industry panel. Horizon's True North Fund became the gold standard. Investors didn't just chase returns, they demanded conscience. And I made sure every dollar we managed carried that weight. One rainy Tuesday, I got a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, Marcus's resignation letter from Viridian, signed in shaky ink, with 2 words scrawled at the bottom in pencil. You were right. I held it for a long moment. Then I recycled it. Revenge had tasted sweet for a day, but building something honest, that lasted. I closed the window against the rain, turned back to my team, and said, all right, let's find the next lie before it takes root. And we did. The years that followed weren't about headlines or takedowns, they were about quiet persistence. Horizon grew, not explosively, but steadily, like an oak tree putting down roots. We turned down billion-dollar deals that didn't meet Aurora's ethical thresholds. We walked away from clients who wanted flexibility on labor or emissions. And every time we did, our credibility deepened. I never sought fame, but in boardrooms and policy circles, my name became shorthand for integrity. Asterisk, run it past Lena's model first. Asterisk. Then, 5 years after that humiliating meeting in Viridian's glass cage, I got an unexpected call. It was the U.S. Department of the Treasury. They wanted to adapt Aurora, not for profit, but for public good, to screen federal infrastructure grants, green subsidies, and climate resilience funds against corruption, greenwashing, and hidden risk. They offered me a role leading the initiative. I said yes, not for power, not for prestige, but because I finally understood the real revenge wasn't taking Marcus's portfolio. It was ensuring no one else would ever be laughed out of a room for asking for fairness. That the next Lena, bright-eyed, overworked, undervalued, would walk into a system that already saw her worth. On my first day at Treasury, I stood in a sunlit federal building in D.C., watching interns set up servers for the new public version of Aurora, now open source, transparent, and free for any city, nonprofit, or watchdog to use. A young woman approached, clutching a notebook. Ms. Hayes? I wrote my thesis on your work. You changed everything. I smiled. No, I said. We're just finally building the world that should have been there all along. And as I walked back to my desk, no longer in a corner cubicle, but in a room with open doors and open windows, I knew the story wasn't mine alone anymore. It belonged to everyone who refused to stay silent. The end.